Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good afternoon, and welcome to WCAT Radio and this edition of Inter Vitam et Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with a Catholic bioethicist. I am your host, Dr. Ann Urlakis. I'm a classically trained and degreed bioethicist, and today I have a very special show planned, a reprise kind of an earlier show we had done before Christmas with Father Jacob Boddicker. Before we launch into today's show, let's begin as we always do with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, our Heavenly Creator, you are the author of life and of truth, the reality that you will each and every human person into being, created from the moment of conception, bearing the dignity and imprint of your own image and likeness within the very essence of our being, is a mystery beyond human understanding. Please help us to have a greater appreciation of the gift of being created in your image and likeness. Help us to reverence that reality in our brothers and sisters, especially in the tiniest and most vulnerable among them. Help us to defend the sanctity of every human life from conception to natural death through the intercession of Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Again, welcome to this week's WCAT broadcast of Inter Vitam et Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with a Catholic bioethicist. And I am delighted to have the opportunity to again chat with dear friend and individual whom I hold in the highest esteem, Father Jacob Boddicker. Welcome,
Good evening.
Father.
Thank you.
Well, you know, when you and I had the opportunity to chat on this program, believe it or not, before Christmas, the hour went so very quickly. And one of the things I really wanted to get to during that time was that phenomenal work that you've been doing on the Native American Reservation, particularly with regard to the portion of your flock whose human remains rest in the cemetery, and just what that project has entailed, and all of the myriad tangents and intricacies that this project has held. So before we jump into that project, and I really want to focus a good chunk of this interview on that project, could you again introduce yourself to the listeners of WCAT Inter Vitam et Mortem, and tell them a little bit about who you are?
Okay. So I'm Father Jacob Boddicker. I'm a Jesuit priest. I guess maybe not newly ordained, but still pretty freshly minted. We'll say I was born as a priest, I guess, June of 2017 in Milwaukee. But Jesuit formation takes a long time. So I've been a Jesuit since 2006. I was born and raised in a small town in Iowa called Tipton, and was a cradle Catholic, born and raised in the faith. Went to college at the University of Wyoming, started off as an archaeology major, but after a couple of years just felt like that wasn't really what I wanted to give my life to, and remembered in high school several of my teachers telling me that they thought I'd be good as a teacher. So I asked several of them where they went to school, and they all said Northern Iowa. So I transferred to the University of Northern Iowa to study history and education, and very quickly realized I did not have a vocation to teaching. All the students in my education courses were incredibly passionate and excited about teaching and getting in the classroom. I was just trying it out. So I felt very out of place and dropped that major to study history. And it was not too long, maybe 2 months after just switching to pure history, that it was kind of slammed all at once by this sense of feeling unfulfilled, feeling unhappy, even though I've been doing all the right steps that society was telling me to do to be happy. Because when I was in school, I went to public school. It was a good school, but the dream that they were selling was, well, if you do good in school, you can get into the college you want, study what you want, get the job you want, make the money you want, live the life you want, you'll be happy. And so I'd done several of those steps already, and I wasn't happy, and I had no idea what to do with my life. What was I going to do with a degree in history? I know that there are things you can do with a degree in history, but I didn't know what I was going to do.
Sure.
And so I just had this kind of moment where I realized only God knows what I should do with my life. I wouldn't say I was a religious person. I went to weekly mass. Sometimes I would even go during a weekday. But I didn't have a prayer life. I didn't really have a relationship, I would say, with God. But I joined the Knights of Columbus while I was in Wyoming, and part of being a knight is you keep the rosary with you at all times, and you're supposed to pray it as often as you can. Nobody ever taught me how to pray the rosary, but I knew which beads were Our Fathers and which were Hail Marys, so I decided, well, I'll pray the rosary just that way, just the Our Fathers and the Hail Marys, and hope that God will give me a hint, So after a month of praying that kind of simplified rosary as often as possible, just had a very powerful encounter with God that scared me, but it really grabbed my attention, and I kept praying, and another month or so went by as when I was first introduced to the Jesuits at a RCIA meeting. I was sponsoring somebody who was going through that process.
Wow.
And the Jesuits were mentioned in a 1-hour kind of lecture on the history of the church. So you think of, in 1 hour, if you're giving a lecture on the history of the Catholic Church, all the things you would touch on and the things you wouldn't. And one of the things that was briefly mentioned was these Jesuit fellows I'd never heard of, but I just instantly felt like this push in my heart to find out more. And the more I read and the more I looked into it, the more God slowly kind of clarified and led me to entering the novitiate. And at the end, it was right toward the end of novitiate that I finally knew, like, yep, this is not only what God wants, but it's what I want. And I've been in ever since. And it was, 3 years, I think, after that, I was in Milwaukee and met you and your family at Holy Hill.
Right.
And, it's amazing. I think often of all the people that I've met, all the graces that have come into my life, all because of that kind of moment of crisis in college where I had no idea what to do with my life, but I realized I had a life to give to something, but I didn't know what I should give it to. And just that little idea, like, why not ask God? Because He's the only one that knows. Like, that was not a thought that came from me.
And in that moment of surrender, in absolute surrender, look where it's led you.
Yeah, here I am in the middle of South Dakota, pastor of 2 parishes, and all the if I had a time machine and could go back to Jake Boddicker in 2005 and University of Northern Iowa and say, hey, in 14 years, you're going to be a priest, you're going to have 2 parishes in the middle of an Indian reservation in South Dakota. What do you think about that? I'd be like, you're crazy. Somebody needs to lock you up. Get out of my dorm room.
Oh, man. Father Jacob is one of my spiritual sons. I've mentioned before that I have 8 children, 5 the old-fashioned way, 3 who are adopted, but I also have quite a few spiritual sons, and Father Jacob is one of my favorite children, my favorite spiritual sons. And yes, there was a meeting at the Basilica of the National Shrine of Mary Help of Christians, place near and dear to my heart and that of my family, and Father Jacob was sitting behind us for daily Mass, and I believe some of my younger children were rather rambunctious and out of hand at that daily Mass, and Father Jacob was kind, offered a kind word, and I gave so you want to come over for dinner? Oh, you're a seminarian. Yeah, well, you want to come over for a home-cooked meal? And Father Jacob became a frequent flyer around our table in our home, is a confirmation sponsor to several of my children and spiritual father to our family. And I have admired the work that you have done here in your first real assignment after ordination, the first location that you've really been placed on the Native American Reservation in South Dakota. And as you told your story, it always amazes me as I see in my own life, in the lives of my children, and in so many people that I've interviewed. Professor Vicki Thorne a couple weeks ago, I know I mentioned this during her interview, that you see your plans for your life, and you see how God uses every bit of that. Your archaeology, which you're doing there now in South Dakota with these cemeteries and the churches that were mission territory for the Jesuits. The teaching, taking a look at teaching as a major and then thinking, there is no way I want to do this. Yet I remember as a Jesuit regent teaching at a all-gent Catholic, all-male Catholic prep school, that you were one of the most popular teachers there. All of these things that you took a taste of as you were discerning, and yet every one of them was planned in God's view as a stepping stone to where you are now. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because the more I think about my vocation and where I started and where I've arrived so far, it's like God already knew what he had in mind. So basically my whole discernment process has always been God convincing me that he's right. Yes.
And even, as I'm speaking this with you, I don't know why it always strikes me as such a surprise, that the God knew what he was doing statement. No, surprise, who would have thought?
So I tell people often, it's like, basically the life of the Christian is to just let God be God. And you just let him do his thing and let him be God in your life. Trust him, obey him, follow him. And it's amazing how much life will change if you just let God be who he is instead of arm wrestling him all the time.
So many of the guests that I've had on this program have said exactly the same thing, same phrase, let God be God. Say yes, and then get out of the way and let him do what he's going to do. And cooperate with his grace. And it is, as we look at all of the issues that we talk about, the Catholic bioethics issues, so many of the things that we talk about are at poignant times in a person's life on this trajectory from conception to eternity, that it is that plunge into trust. And it's not a free fall. It's a plunge into trust. It is a giving our will to him, and then seeing what he has planned, because his plans are way bigger than ours. But it's so hard to do that. And I love interviewing these folks, you and the others, because it is so illustrative. I truly am humbled by the stories that are shared with me here. So you arrived on the Native American Reservation. Explain the where you were at just before ordination, after ordination, and what happened when you got there.
So after I was ordained in June of 2017, I had to go back to Berkeley where I did my theology studies and get my things packed up and shipped out, and then spent the summer mostly in Omaha at Creighton University, just doing daily masses, hearing confessions, and just kind of flexing my baby priest muscles, so to speak, cutting my teeth, you could say, and just gathering a lot of valuable experience, especially in the confessional. I mean, the learning curve is quite steep because you have the authority, you have the power, but you kind of lack the experience. So, oh my gosh, what do I even say to this person? Or, wow, here I am, a month into priesthood, and I'm hearing that sin. And it's so humbling to think, wow, they're coming to me because I'm a priest, and they trust that I can help them somehow. But they're also coming for the grace they know that I can give, whether I'm a moron or not.
Right.
And just, how humbling that experience was. And I'm very grateful for that time at Creighton because, again, it got me used to saying Mass almost every day. So I was just getting more and more comfortable with saying Mass for real instead of little practice Masses I did as a deacon in our house chapel. And getting used to preaching and coming up with homilies every day. And then when I got out here, and it was actually the day after the big eclipse that everybody was all stoked about a couple summers back.
Okay.
I drove up from Omaha and officially settled in here. And my initial mission was to teach at our little Catholic academy that we have going on here. I think it's about 5 years old now. Sapa'un Catholic Academy. Sapa'un being Lakota for black robe, which was the name the Lakota gave the Jesuit missionaries. And we've got about, I think, 50 students now, K through 8, and beautiful little school, real gem. And so I taught religion there to the third through 8th grade, so the older kids. And I also would help out at our various parishes here. We've got 5 active parishes here on the Rosebud. And so I'd kind of go from parish to parish on Sunday as the other priests would ask for help, fill in for funerals that just pop up all over the place here and there. And then it was, I think, November so it was just a few months after I arrived, I was told that one of the priests was going to go on a sabbatical for several months. And so I'd be taking over his couple of parishes until he got back. So in January of my first year, I became I always told people I was keeping the chair warm until the other guy got back. But I essentially was pastoring 2 parishes. I didn't have any authority to make any decisions. I wasn't out to change anything, but I was taking care of anything that came up. And then in April of the same year, I was told that the provincial had asked him to consider taking on a new assignment at a retreat house that was just opening up west of Omaha called the Cloisters on the Platte, because the man who built it was looking for Jesuit spiritual directors and retreat directors. So this man was approached, and he said, okay. And suddenly I found myself not only keeping the chair warm, but it was my chair to keep. So
wow.
I wasn't even a year into priesthood, and suddenly I'm the pastor of 2 parishes.
And not just 2 parishes on a Native American reservation in South Dakota. These are not just 2 ordinary parishes. As we talked the last time, just a little bit of background, that you have a very different population in terms of life expectancy, in terms of the average life expectancy, if I remember correctly, was just hovering around 50 at the latest census.
Something like that, between 50 and 60. I mean, it's drastically lower than the average for the whole country.
The history, the hurt, the trauma that exists, the amount of alcoholism, the education, the amount of unemployment, you are dealing with a very different population on the Rosebud than most other pastors. So, back to where you're at. But all of those ethical considerations, demographic, spiritual, everything, weigh into every decision that you're making there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are like realities that you can relate to other kind of parish situations. Like there's a lot of realities out here that you would find in inner city parishes in Chicago and New York, with drugs, with the gang issue isn't as bad here as it can be on other reservations, but it is an issue that does come up a little bit. But, the education difficulties, for example, or, life expectancy, unemployment, poverty, racism. But then you also have some of the rural church realities, small populations, poorer populations.
Right.
Having to deal with weather. If it snows bad enough, we have to cancel Mass.
Right.
Because the roads can't get cleared in time, and it's dangerous. And when you live 20 miles out on the prairie, you just can't get to church. I'm fortunate.
The factor of the isolation. You had invited my family and I, and we're still looking at the possibility of trying to get out to be with you folks for a 100th anniversary coming up. And as I'm looking at the options for transportation, just to fly in to get there. We can fly into an airport that still requires a 4-hour drive to get to the reservation. Train,
depending on which airport, yeah.
Amtrak doesn't run in South Dakota.
No, you can get as close as Fargo, I think.
Exactly. Everything that we're looking at, this is a very different parish experience, especially for a new priest, than anything out there. So keep going.
So, combining all those different realities, plus the cultural reality of a Native American reservation with many people who are very proud of their Lakota culture and are trying very hard to keep it alive and to try and reclaim some of what was lost. So there's tensions there. There's, just the ugly history of the fact that there is a reservation. So basically everything that they did not prepare you for in formation is what
You didn't
what
take
I have.
courses in this at Berkeley, really?
I'm afraid I didn't, no. And so part of my whole project with trying to look into the old cemeteries and where we used to have mission churches, part of it started with not just an interest in history in general, but also a desire to understand how did things get to where they are? How did it start? What is the history of this place, as particularly the history of the church here, so that I have kind of a connection to that. I'm not just walking in blind to the situation, and I just want to. Because it seems to me, my instinct was, if I'm going to be here in this really alien place in many ways, and if I'm going to serve the people here well, I need to love them, because love inspires generosity and inspires courage, and it opens one up to wisdom if it's the right kind of love, if it's not infatuation, of course. And for me, a part of that is getting to know, I guess I wanted to get to know the church the way I'd know a person. Like, where are you from? How'd you get here? What have you been up to, And trying to find where all these old churches are and discovering the cemeteries that used to be associated with them and getting a sense of the history and hearing the stories has really helped me fall in love with the church here. And really cultivating a desire to really give myself to it and to try and help it to grow and to, be something that can serve and help the people here and be a part of the healing process that needs to happen here. And I don't know if it's the best route, but it's certainly been helpful for me.
It has been amazing. Every time I've told this story that you have passed on to us, over dinner and watching this grow, it has just been amazing to watch the transformation. And as you have fallen in love with the the history, the people, the congregation, those to whom you're ministering, they in turn have come to appreciate you in a whole different way too, because they realize that you're the real deal, that you are there because you love God and wish to serve them, and you revere their elders and what they hold dear, and in turn, they want to get to know you, and they want to get to know the God that you are in persona Christi for. So keep going.
Yeah, that's certainly the ultimate hope. and I think part of it, too, trying to be familiar with the history of the church here and finding these cemeteries and visiting them and praying at them and sharing that with people, it helps them to see, oh, he's not just an in-and-out priest. He's not just here for a few years and gone. He's really trying to lay down some roots here and really trying to get to know us and what we care about, and remembering one's ancestors and even caring for the graves of those who have deceased in your family. I've seen graves out in the middle of nowhere of somebody who died, 70, 80, 90, 100 years ago, and you see, well, somebody has put plastic flowers here. Somebody has left a stick of gum or a can of beer, or, there was some token of somebody remembers this person and is still showing some kind of care well after this person died. And it's really edifying for me, but it also really drives home this notion that's been very important in Lakota culture of the spirits of one's ancestors. Like, you try to remember them forever. And even those who are Catholic, like having memorial feasts a year after a person dies and going out to the cemeteries on Memorial Day and other days to kind of tidy things up. I got a call from a woman who now lives in, I think, Virginia, and grew up on the neighboring reservation, but she has a child who's buried in one of my cemeteries. And she's hoping to be able to move that child's casket from my cemetery to a cemetery on a neighboring reservation, because all the family members who were taking care of that grave in this area have all passed away, and she has family on the other reservation that would be able to take care of it if it was closer. And so, another thing they did not train me for in my Jesuit formation is, what are the laws and the requirements for exhuming, digging up a grave and moving a body from one cemetery to another? I don't know. So there's a lot of things that I never thought I'd have to learn that I've had to learn out here.
Wow. And yet, when you look back at your preparation in college and in high school and the things that you were drawn to, all of that, the archaeology, everything has in some way helped to prepare you, to form you, into who you are, to give you the necessary tools to be able to do what you're doing.
Yeah, and it certainly has all kind of tied in. I didn't learn a lot about archaeology as far as like digging and cataloging and stuff, but it really continued to deepen and cultivate my love for just, the stuff that came before.
Sure.
And especially it was focused on Native American culture and history. And again, I didn't go super deep into it before I transferred. But again, it helped deepen and cultivate that. And, here I am on a reservation. And I think part of what's helped me fall in love with this place, too, is I've always had an appreciation for history. And history is so important to the people here. And especially trying to reclaim knowledge of their history, a lot of which was lost in all the wars that took place and the formation of the reservation and, and efforts to try and eliminate the culture altogether. And, you get out here and you just feel like the history's in the dirt. It's just all over the place. And it's just a really fascinating place to live.
I've seen the photographs that you have that are just exquisite. And you're right.
Yeah, it's also a beautiful landscape.
It is. I mean, aesthetically, it's gorgeous. And the photographs, you're a very good photographer. You were presenting a vista that is beautiful and very poignant. The contrast between the rugged, weathered tombstones and the beauty of the natural surroundings is often very appealing. I remember you saying early on that you had been given these great homilies at Creighton. You're geared up as a new priest. We've heard you speak here before in Milwaukee. You're a gifted writer, gifted speaker. You get out there on the reservation, and you get maybe 2 people showing up for daily Mass. And it took you a little bit aback. And then looking out into the cemetery, you realize that they are your flock as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So it was only a couple months after I got here that I saw this map at our little mission museum that had the rough locations of where we used to have mission churches, and there were, I think, 37 on that map. And I was really struck by that. And I remember asking, well, how many churches do we have now? And we have 5 active ones, 2, 3 structures that are 2 structures that are inactive but still standing, and 1 church that there's Mass once a month.
Okay.
And then I've found, I think, 2 partially collapsed buildings and 2 completely abandoned, kind of, can't use them again, buildings. But then all the rest are gone.
Nothing.
And so I thought,
trace.
yeah, well, barely a trace.
Okay.
Usually you can still find the traces of a foundation.
Okay.
The problem is a lot of them are literally out in the middle of the prairie.
I've seen your photographs. I mean, I've actually, taken a sharp, held my breath when I realized some of the places that you are, and I'm really hoping you don't encounter a rattlesnake or.
Well, when I'm going way out in the middle of nowhere, I usually bring a pistol for that reason. So,
okay.
Just in case.
Yeah, cougar or
not
something.
Not that probably comforts you.
No. Yeah, you've got my family and I praying for you every time we hear that you're out on one of these adventures. But
so,
as you say, you find the map, you're looking, and what you're finding out there are the remnants of faith. But historically, they scream to the reality that there was faith there. There was a Catholic presence there, people who believed.
Yeah. So, like one of my favorite places that I've been to was St. James Church. It's way out in the middle of the prairie, just south of the White River, kind of almost straight east of a really tiny town called Belvedere on I-90. And it's on a guy's ranch land, and I was visiting a couple parishioners at their house and telling them about my interest in this project. And the gentleman at this place, this parishioner of mine, he said he has a friend who has what he remembers being a Catholic cemetery, and he's pretty sure there used to be a church. So he called the friend up and said, hey, you remember about 20 years ago one of them Jesuits came out and put a cross on your property because there was a cemetery or something? Do you remember where that is? And they chatted for a little bit, like, if we go out there today, you're going to shoot at us or anything? And, okay, great. So he took me out. We drove all these 2-track roads out in the middle of nowhere, and sure enough, came up to where we could see what was left of this old wooden cross, and there was one tombstone of a 2-year-old girl named Amelia.
Oh, wow.
And let me see if I can find the photograph here. And it was the only grave marker left. I know there were a couple of other people buried there because I've found a record elsewhere. I guess I must not have taken a photograph of it. But I remember it was a 2-year-old girl named Amelia, and then not too far away was where the church used to be. But all you can see is this kind of faint rectangle in the grass where the soil is compacted more where the foundation was, so the grass grows differently. Okay. And then there's this big concrete slab that used to be the front step, and there's still 2 iron boot scrapers stuck in the concrete.
Wow.
And then a little further away, you can see these 4 kind of concrete posts where there was a bell tower. And that was Little St. James out in the middle of nowhere. And I remember standing there and looking around, and it's just prairie all around. There's no sign of civilization except 2-track roads and fences. And I thought, people were baptized here, and Mass was celebrated here, and people were married and buried here.
This is sacred ground.
Yeah, and it's sacred ground. There used to be a church here, and people used to live in this area in either teepees or like canvas army tents, maybe log cabins, maybe. But there was a church here. And when the government started providing housing, people moved closer to those areas and into towns. So a lot of the prairie churches were either moved with the people or just abandoned because they weren't needed. There wasn't anybody around. But to think that one of my predecessors rode a horse and buggy out there or chugged a Model T all the way out there just to bring the sacraments to these people. But it was the lay catechists who were the anchors of these little parishes all over the place because they were local, they spoke the language, they knew the culture, and so they would catechize and really build these communities up. One of my favorite graves that I've come across was of a man named Peter Tall Mandan. And I don't know anything about him really except what is written on his tombstone. And if I can pull the picture up here. Here we go. So here's his tombstone. Peter Tall Mandan, born in 1865, died April 26, 1906. Chief, catechist, first color bearer of the American Federation of Catholic Societies.
Wow.
And I saw this and I thought, holy smokes. This guy, his Catholic faith was so important that he wanted catechist and first color bearer of the American Federation of Catholic Societies etched in marble on his tombstone. And the graveyard is located up on this hill, several miles outside of the nearest town, in the middle of a cattle pasture. The fence is in fairly bad shape. All the tombstones are fallen down, and his tombstone is just laying on the ground. And I thought, man, this is, it was very poignant for me because I thought here's a chief,
this is a
catechist. I found that he was actually baptized by Peter DeSmet.
Wow.
And so I just thought, here's this great man, but nobody remembers him. And here his tomb is just lying here in the middle of nowhere. And so it's experiences like those that help me realize, we believe in a church that extends beyond the realm of the visual, beyond the earthly. We're the church militant. There's the church suffering or the church, in purgatory, and there's the church triumphant. But it seemed to me that all the souls buried in the cemeteries located on the mission, in one way or another, they're still a part of this church.
Right.
Whether they're part of the church triumphant or the church in purgatory. And so whenever I would find these cemeteries, I'd take the time to pray and ask the souls of those who can, God knows and they know, to pray for me to be the pastor that their descendants need me to be, and to pray for the church. And it kind of raised my consciousness. Like there's a whole, granted, I don't have to like pastor these souls, of course, but they can still be a part of this. And, I just realized, like, I need their prayers. I need their help because they know what's going on better than I do. And the thought of hundreds of souls nagging at God to help me out here comforts me a great deal.
Oh, I bet.
But also they care about their family and their descendants. They care about the church that has been left behind, especially I think of these great catechists. Another catechist that I've heard of, I've met some of his family members. I've seen his grave. He's buried in one of my church cemeteries in Mission. His name was Harry Blue Thunder, and he was the first Native American to receive the Lumen Christi Award from the Catholic Extension back in the 90s, because he was the last surviving of the old catechists. And so I think of him a lot. Here's somebody who really dedicated their life to building up the church, to bringing people to Christ in the Catholic faith. And, he was recognized nationally for it. I guess even I do a ministry at the local jail, and one of his granddaughters happens to be there currently. And she remembers being a little girl and meeting John Paul II.
Wow.
With her grandfather. And I had the pleasure of telling her, you actually met a saint. And she's like, he's a saint now? So, there's still that legacy of the catechists. I've also found photographs at our Mission Museum.
I was just going to mention the photographs. Good. Keep going.
Yes, of life on the actual mission itself in St. Francis, where many of the Jesuits lived. We had Franciscan nuns who were here, and a Catholic boarding school with a few hundred students. And just the Catholic life that was cultivated there. I've seen photographs of Eucharistic processions outside with the canopy.
I was just thinking about the procession. I was just thinking about one that you had shown us in several.
Yeah, and they're marching across the grass to the cemetery, and at the time St. Francis was just the mission. The town hadn't built up. And also a photograph of a Native man and Native woman in full Native dress. With the man had a full war bonnet on, they're dressed in buckskin, and they're kneeling before this huge outdoor crucifix. And I've seen all these other photographs. There's a beautiful photograph, one of my favorites, of one of the Franciscan nuns smiling and holding this little bow and arrow, and there's 4 Native boys in buckskin and eagle feather headdresses with their own bows and arrows, and they're all doing archery, and this sister is just laughing. And so all these beautiful images of kind of the intersection of Native and Catholic life, and just seeing the vibrant Catholic life that existed out here, and wondering, where did that go? What happened there? How did things get to the way they are? And there's all sorts of reasons that are well beyond the realm of my ability to do much about. But learning about it and seeing it.
Complex reasons. They're complex.
Yes.
There is
very
no
complex.
single factor, and there is no single solution to what is out there. But like a good historian, what you're doing is and it pairs perfectly with Catholicism. It's the truth. We believe in the truth, and he has a name. He's Jesus.
Right.
And here you are uncovering the truth of what existed, the truth of the vibrant faith that was there. And not coming up with any social policies or making social claims on why it isn't, understanding that there's a complex set of reasons, but just trying to, merely trying to show the truth of this is what did exist, and bearing witness to this is what existed is huge.
Yeah, and so learning a little more and more about what was here and what existed, and just how important the Catholic faith was for so many people here, even though it hasn't really given me any answers or solutions, what it does is it cultivates my own love for the church here.
Sure.
It, again, deepened my awareness of there are lots of Catholic souls from this place that care about the church that I can ask for their prayers and their help. And it also, the more familiar I get with that history, the more I can bring what I've been learning to the people that I minister to, and to help them to realize they are carrying on a beautiful and sacred and important legacy of being a Lakota Catholic.
Sure.
And there doesn't have to be this animosity between the two traditions. That I've seen the photographs, I've seen the graves, I've seen the evidence that one can be Lakota and Catholic, and it leads to a really beautiful thing.
And
it's not about like a syncretism, but it's about, being authentically who you are as a Lakota man, a Lakota woman, and then bringing that to the Catholic Church as a treasure, as every culture has in the Church's history. I think of my own Germanic ancestors out worshiping trees. And granted, we didn't bring tree worship into the church, but we brought things like genuflection to the Eucharist, which I understand was the Germanic custom of greeting a king, is you genuflected before him. Ah. And so like that has, my people brought that to the church, and it's a beautiful thing. It's like, how do we treat kings? Well, don't ask an American, because we spark revolutions against kings. But, the Germans, like, they had chieftains, they had kings, they had ways of greeting them and acting around them, and genuflecting before you take a seat before a king, that was part of it. At least that's what I found. So every culture, we have a little bit of Greek in the Roman Mass, and the mother tongue of Latin in our rite. All these things come from the different cultures and the peoples that brought their little treasures to Jesus Christ to be baptized into the one true faith. And out here, the Lakota were doing the same. And so just trying to become acquainted with that so I can share that with people who may have forgotten or maybe haven't come across it in a while, and then it reawakens their own stories and memories, especially if they went to the boarding school back when we had it. I often wear my cassock whenever I go to the office, whenever I'm going to celebrate Mass, whenever I'm doing a funeral or something. And the cassock has kind of a troubled history of sorts in the society. Carries, people assume certain things about you if you wear the cassock.
Right.
And so there was a time when I had to do a wake service, and all my clerics were in the laundry. So the only kind of priestly garb I had clean and available was my cassock, and I thought, well, I'll just wear it this one time. I'm going to be wearing a surplice with it anyway for this wake service, so no big deal. And I walked in wearing my cassock, and there was a gentleman who was singing some music, and he stopped. And he said, "Everybody turn around. Look, there's a black robe." And everybody turned around, their eyes went wide, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I remember Father so-and-so from the boarding school." And then he just started telling all these stories. And there were all sorts of smiles, especially among the elderly. And then toward the end of the prayer, I was chanting the Salve Regina.
Oh, wow.
And so many people came up afterwards like, "I remember when the sisters used to sing that." And all these stories just started flowing out, all because I chanted one song and all because I wore a cassock. So now I wear a cassock all the time because people, for them, it's a part of the tradition here. Is the Jesuits wore the cassock. The Jesuits wore the cassock. And I'm not trying to make a political statement. No. My brothers here haven't said anything negative about it because they've seen, like, the people, at least where I'm ministering, have responded to it in a positive way.
Right.
Just last week, I stopped in to greet a family who is having a wake at our hall. They lost a baby, stillborn. And they had another clergy person from another church doing the service. So I was just stopping in to offer my condolences, and one of the gentlemen there asked if I could give him a ride home. And so I did. And it turns out he's a keeper of the pipe. He practices the Lakota tradition exclusively. And we had this interreligious dialogue the whole way to his house. And he said the reason that he wanted to ask me for a ride home is because he wanted to talk to a black robe about certain things he'd heard about the Catholic Church and Catholic faith.
Wow.
And we had this fantastic conversation the whole ride there. And we saw this, on the way to his house, we saw a hawk fly over the road. And he pointed at that and said, "Oh, wow. You know, Dunkashila must really like the conversation that we're having, because he sent that hawk, and that's a sign that he really appreciates this. Like, what do you think it means?" And so I said, whenever I see a hawk or an eagle sitting in a tree or flying by, it reminds me of my guardian angel, who's always watching over and keeping an eye out for things and pouncing on the things that are coming at me. And so I always see them as kind of a sign of like God's presence and protection. So like we were able to kind of like talk about that, like what that animal or that sign, means to us. And it was really interesting. But again, it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't worn the cassock and awakened this man's memory to the Jesuit missionaries who came before.
So much of what you're saying, so much of this, of your experience there has been that, memory eternal, that awakening the memory of the people, awakening the truth of that memory. And it hit me that at the beginning, the first grave that you saw on that particular cemetery was Amelia, a 2-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
There is the intermingling of the sorrow and the love of the true faith. There is sorrow, and here this is a funeral for a stillborn child too. Fast forward how many decades, and it is the same pains and the same joy and the same God, our Lord, our faith, that is there in the midst of all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so there is this kind of thread of the eternal that runs through all of this. All the cemeteries that I've except a couple where, because you can tell there were some cemeteries where it was exclusively wooden markers. I found one way out on the prairie. It's the fence. It has an excellent fence around it, so it's protected. But there was only one stone marker. It was a veteran from, I think he died in 1941. So he must have been a veteran of World War I maybe. But it was one of those white marble markers.
Sure.
And his name was under the water. So he didn't even have a Christian name. And it was the only grave marker standing. And I just had this sense of like that soldier is still watching over the people buried here. And I could see just in the pattern of the grass that there were several other graves around him, but there were no markers remaining. And then fast forward to today, veterans are very respected here. And whenever a veteran dies, other veterans will come and, serve as a color guard and things like that. You also just see, again, I saw a lot of child graves at all these cemeteries. A lot of them will have like a little stone lamb on the top of their tombstone. And you'll see tons of them all over the place. And especially in the early 1900s, there are a lot of diseases going around. And again, there's still a lot of child deaths that happen around here. The family that had this stillborn, I think they already have 3 other stillborn children in our cemetery. Not from the same person, but from within that family. A lot of suicides out here. I've had 2 suicides that I've been involved with, and then a third that I wasn't involved with as a minister, but I met with the family. So that's the reality out here as well. But visiting the cemeteries, you see a lot of the realities that were then are still here. But as you say, the same God and the same church is here with these people, ministering to them, trying to care for them, seeing to the repose of the deceased and the care of the family. And so it just seems natural, I guess, to me, to continue some level of care for those souls. And you think especially of the oldest graves that I've found, or once in a while when I come across the tombstone of a chief, to think what it meant at that time for a chief to convert to the Catholic faith. There was one, I think it was Chief Hollowhorn Bear. He had 3 or 4 wives, which was acceptable in the Lakota culture. He was a chief, and he became Catholic at a fairly old age, and he had to choose which of his wives to keep and which ones to dismiss, because as a Catholic he knew he could only be married to one.
Wow.
And you just don't even think of, like, you know, when, say, a Protestant feels called to come into full communion with the church, they might have some family issues, but maybe in parts of Africa and India you still have the difficulty of, well, if I become Catholic, I have to choose which wife to keep and which to dismiss, and then making sure I provide for their needs as I dismiss them, you know. Like, oh my gosh. But then also a chief, like that influence and the people looking up to you as a keeper of the tradition and the leader, and what it had to have meant for these chiefs to become Catholic, to become Christian. It's hard to imagine what that must have been like. And so asking, like, that courageous soul to pray for me and to pray for their people.
Right.
And to trust that, you know, well, they may not be a chief on this earth anymore, but they have even more influence now. God willing, they're in heaven with God.
To trust that heroic charity transcends the grave, and that they, too, are engaged in the spiritual works of mercy and are praying for their people and are praying for you and are praying for the universal church.
Exactly.
Is just tremendous. I know you've told me previously that you've offered masses for these folks as well.
Yeah, like whenever I'm offering a mass for the Holy Souls of Purgatory, the souls that come to my mind first are the souls of the people here that are kind of under my care, that I've visited in the cemeteries. And whenever I visit one of these cemeteries for the first time, usually I find them on Google Maps, because the map that the museum had wasn't terribly accurate. It would just kind of give me a ballpark, and I'd sit at my computer with Google Maps with the satellite view, just looking for any sign, like a little square in the land, you know, and then I'd drive out there and see what it is, and lo and behold, it was this church, or it was this cemetery. And whenever I go, I make a point to pray for the souls there. So whether it's I pull out my breviary and pray from the hour that it happens to be at that time, whether it's praying from the Book of Blessings, there's a special kind of rite for visiting a graveyard, some kind of prayer. And then I always do blessing like I do at the end of Mass for the souls there. You know, again, I see them as parishioners of a sort, and I exhort them to pray for me and to pray for the people. And just let them know, like, you are not forgotten.
That is just incredible. And the benefits in terms of tangible benefits, and obviously there's huge spiritual benefits, but among the benefits are that the people to whom you are ministering see you and see the love that you have, and have responded, you know, they've responded with gusto, embracing you and embracing what you're doing. You've gotten their trust, and that was not the reason you were doing it, but in essence,
it was
you've been rewarded with trust.
Yeah, they've seen, like, he really cares about us, because look at the care that he's shown for our ancestors, for the past, for the history of this place. And so it kind of inadvertently translated into people seeing, like, I care about them. If he cares this much about the past, he must care about us in the present. And it's hard. I don't have any staff or volunteers, so everything I'm doing at my parish is, in many ways, is kind of on my own. And so people have hopefully have seen the dedication I try to give. And it's also, I realize it's a very slow work, because it does take time for people to trust you, especially if they know, well, you're just going to be gone in a few years. I was initially assigned here for 3 years. I asked for an extension and was granted it, so I'll be here a total of 6. And when I shared that with people, they were thrilled. And I think that also helped them kind of open up, like, wow, he asked to stay here longer.
Asked to stay here, right.
And so we'll see. We'll see where it goes. But yeah, there's little blossoms. My first year here, there was nobody preparing for sacraments. I wasn't really handing on the faith in any other way except preaching and sacraments. But right now, I'm preparing a little 8-year-old girl for her first communion.
Wow.
Going to baptize a baby next Sunday. And just another young lady approached me at Mass just this morning asking what she's got to do to have her baby baptized. I've got 5 middle schoolers in confirmation class right now, and one gentleman going through RCIA, along with his wife, who is Catholic but was never confirmed. So it's already within a year. It's like, oh, there's a few blossoms on this tree. Nice. If it gets any much beyond that, though, like, I'm going to need extra help. But we'll see. I'll take it.
That is fabulous. We are, again, at the end of an hour. I can't believe it's gone this fast, but it has. And we could keep going, and I hope you come back and do this again, but because I think you've got quite a story to share. I am deeply touched by what you're doing. I pray for you every single day. My entire family is praying for you, and I'm anxious to get out there to visit. So you've got the whole Urlakis family who is hoping to be able to get out there and see this with our own eyes, walk this history, and get to know and love the people that you love. And thank you so much for opening our eyes to this important ministry and sharing your story with us, because I think your story resonates with men in formation. Your story resonates with so many at different levels. Before we close, I'm going to ask if you could say the final prayer. I opened, but if you would be so kind as to give us your priestly blessing and say a prayer.
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the grace of this Sabbath day. We thank you for the grace of this hour of conversation and for everything that you've been able to do here on the Rosebud, especially through me, your humble and unworthy servant. We ask your blessing upon all the people here and all those listening to this podcast, upon Mary Ann and her family. We thank you for the opportunity as well to share the history of what you've done here, all for the glory of your name and honor of your Son. May the blessing of Almighty God be upon all of you, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Very welcome. My pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.